Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our Clone Wars history series. We're in the second year of the war, 21 BBY. In our last episode we looked at the epic invasion and liberation of Ryloth. Perhaps one of the best examples of Republic military doctrine during the Clone Wars, this operation was carried out in 3 phases. Starting from breaking a blockade in orbit, transitioning to a ground invasion, and finally ending in the capture of the planet's capital and Separatist leader. Chapter 3. Battle of Felucia. The Battle of Ryloth ended in the defeat of Wat Tambor and all the Separatist forces on the planet. It shows us that despite the fact the Separatists outnumbered the clone troopers across the galaxy, whenever a Republic army was led by a well-trained group of Jedi Knights, things would usually go in their favor. And the Republic had far more Jedi generals than the Separatists had good commanders. Sure, you had standouts like Admiral Trench, but most Separatist fleets and armies were led by commander droids who were very predictable. Shortly after the Battle of Ryloth ended, the Battle of Vapor erupted in the Naboo system. A Skakoan named Kolteska had started stirring up some trouble on the planet. He was formerly a well-respected scientist working for the Techno Union, but a freak accident occurred while he was wearing his pressure suit, which almost killed him and left his body disfigured. In order to function and move around, Kolteska built himself a cybernetic suit. The scientist enjoyed the power his new suit gave him, and he began bolting all sorts of attachments and weapons to his body, and would eventually become a mercenary. Kolteska then invented a gravity polarization beam. This was a super weapon which could rip things apart at the atomic level. Kolteska wanted to use this weapon to destroy Naboo's sun in order to impress Count Dooku. Padme Amidala, who was recently in Naboo investigating the Blue Shadow virus, journeys to Vapor to investigate what the hell is going on and is captured once again. Upon finding out about Teska's plan, the Republic is forced to launch an assault on his facility. Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano end up engaging Kolteska in battle, while Padme sabotages the super weapon and causes it to destroy itself. Once again, disaster is averted in the Naboo system. Elsewhere, the Battle of Atrakan was finally winding down. The planet Atrakan was an extremely rich source of dunium. Dunium was a heavy metal used for ship construction. Separatist forces had taken control over the mining operation there and had fortified their positions. When the GAR arrived to dislodge them, the two sides were quickly weighed down into a stalemate. The Separatist forces on the planet resorted to using biochemical weapons. While the GAR was prepared to encounter such weapons, the civilian populace was not. After a year of fighting, the Republic finally managed to dislodge the Separatist forces on the planet, but the victory came at a great cost. 90% of the civilian populace had been either killed or displaced. Battles like this one began really shaking the morale of the Republic's civilian populace, and it started making a lot of people wonder whether the Clone Wars was actually worth it. Shortly after these two battles, the Republic began planning an invasion of the planet Felucia. Like Ryloth, Felucia was another world located in the Outer Rim territories, just a jump or so away from Yavin. Like most worlds in this part of the galaxy, it had a pretty sparse population of only around 8.5 million settlers. Most of these colonists had settled on the planet looking to take advantage of the world's many rich resources. What made Felucia unique was that it was covered in giant mushroom forests. The world was incredibly hot and humid and bathed in ultraviolet light from its nearby star, and the plants, fungal life forms, and creatures all had a deeply symbiotic relationship, creating a perfectly balanced ecosystem. Many of the plants and fungi on the world were only unique to Felucia, and they also had very complex chemical and biostructures which made them very useful as drugs and medicine. One of the more popular herbs that could be domesticated and farmed on the planet was known as Nicelin. Nicelin had very good healing qualities and was widely sought after throughout the entire galaxy. Other than Bacta, very few drugs or chemicals had the same effect as Nicelin. While these kind of healing herbs were less important for a droid army like the one the Separatist army sent into battle, denying such a world to the Republic was of great strategic benefit for the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Earlier in the war, the Separatists had destroyed a Republic medical facility orbiting Felucia. It had been made to take advantage of the bountiful resources on the planet, all of which was harvested by small communities and independent farmers. It was a part of the CIS's original attempt to take control of the Outer Rim away from the Republic. It wasn't until now that the GR had resources to retake the planet. Felucia was an interesting, if not difficult, world to wage battle on. The gigantic mushroom forest definitely served as a unique battlefield to fight in. Republic colonists had a really difficult time taming the world, and very little of the planet was actually developed, thanks to the sheer tenacity of the local flora and fauna. Even making the smallest clearing in the mushroom forest was a pretty difficult thing to do. If the gigantic mushrooms and carnivorous bacteria didn't get to you, the accolades definitely will. Therefore, most battles between the Republic and Separatists were fought at close ranges in heavily forested areas. The Republic invasion forces found movement pretty difficult, and even with Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Ahsoka Tano leading them, they soon became surrounded by the Separatists, whose numbers were much higher than the Republic first anticipated. On top of that, a Separatist fleet of several munificent star frigates, along with a recusant light destroyer, had blockaded the planet, preventing any reinforcements from coming and preventing Republic forces from leaving the planet. The recusant-class light destroyer was an interesting ship, not as commonly seen as the munificent and Providence-class warships of the CIS Navy. Also known as the Commerce Guild destroyer, this ship was anywhere from 1.2 kilometers to 2.5 kilometers long. Like most Separatist ships, the recusant was heavily automated and only required a tiny crew of 300. In comparison, the Republic Venator-class Star Destroyer, which was around the same size, had a crew of over 7,000 clones. The recusant's basic systems were operated by a droid brain. The low number of crew also meant that the ship was relatively skeletal in nature, requiring very few areas with life support or oxygen. Its cargo space was mainly full with fuel cells, weapon systems, and over 40,000 battle droids. Although more formidable than a munificent-class star frigate, the recusant-class light destroyer was still considerably weaker than a Venator-class star destroyer. Meanwhile, back on the surface, the Republic's recent string of victories had made their forces a bit overconfident, and the Republic forces under the command of Anakin and Obi-Wan finally run out of places to go and are forced to circle the wagons and fortify their position. While the all-terrain tactical enforcers and turbo tanks served as great weapons platforms and even forward operating bases, they weren't as effective in the close-range mushroom jungle fighting on Felucia. Their large size also meant that the clones were forced to stay in more clear areas with less coverage. The Separatists, meanwhile, were able to send waves and waves of super battle droids and dwarf droids to pin them down. Separatist tanks were also slowly closing in on their position behind the Separatist droids, and they were about to be overrun. Were I in charge of this Republic task force, I would probably abandon the vehicles and then just fade into the forest. But the Republic had another plan. They called in reinforcements, or more accurately, a rescue party to take them away from the planet. So they'll need to stay near a clearing so that the gunships can come and pick them up. In orbit, Jedi Master Plo Koon arrives with 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers along with his 104th Battalion. Plo Koon was probably one of the best pilots in the Jedi Order, easily as good as Anakin Skywalker and perhaps a little better. While his capital ships engaged the Separatist blockade, he personally led a starfighter escort and a group of gunships past the Separatist blockade down to the surface. While under heavy fire from Separatist vulture droids, the gunships landed in the clearing aside the surrounded Republic forces. Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi call for a fighting retreat towards the gunships, but once again Ahsoka Tano fails to listen to the order and stubbornly remains fighting while standing on top of a giant turbo tank. Once again, she has tunnel vision just like during the Battle of Ryloth, and she doesn't see the larger picture of the battlefield around her. She's completely unaware that the droids retreating in front of her were a part of a feint designed to lead her forces into a trap. Separatist droids were now closing in on their position from all directions. Obi-Wan Kenobi finally talks some sense into the Padawan, and they manage to extract her before it's too late. Once again, Ahsoka Tano has taken after her master, perhaps a little bit too much. Anakin was famous for disobeying orders during battles, perhaps finally seeing his own behavior in his Padawan will force him to grow up a bit. Back at the temple, the Jedi Council reprimanded the young Padawan just a few weeks before Ahsoka had done the same thing during the Battle of Ryloth, after she led her squadron of starfighters into a trap, leaving a Republic cruiser defenseless. Admiral Wolf Yularen had been severely hurt by the attack. Anakin steps up as a master should and takes responsibility for his Padawan's actions. After all, he is the one training her. In many ways, Ahsoka and Anakin were a perfect match for each other. They had similar character flaws which they saw in each other, which helped grow their own self-awareness about those flaws. Felucia would remain a contested planet for the rest of the war, and in 19 BBY, the 182nd Legion would be sent to retake the world, but soon after lost contact with Republic Central Command. The 501st would be sent a month later, and they found out that the entire 182nd had been wiped out. The conditions on the planet were terrible. Along with fighting the Separatists, the clones suffered heavy casualties from attrition and disease. It was only because of the leadership of Jedi General Aayla Secura that the 501st would survive their mission to the planet. But ultimately, the clones would go on to turn against their general during Order 66. So as you can see, serving on Felucia was probably one of the worst assignments in the entire Clone Wars for a clone. It was just not a friendly place to be. Anyway guys, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our Clone Wars history series. In our next episode, we're going to be talking about stealing Jedi babies, which is always fun. Anyway guys, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.